first Blood Brothers of 2022. Happy New Year to the listeners and to you, Sean Coleman.
Happy New Year.
We're missing a Rob Parker tonight, who's just travelled back from far away from the country, from down the country somewhere. So we do not have a Rob, but we do have a jam-packed episode because usually we've got one guest, and tonight we have got three. It's a Nordic special. So I'm going to pass you along to each of our guests who will introduce themselves, and then we'll have a chat. So, Thomas, should we start with you?
Yes, why not? My name is Thomas Inger. I'm 48 years old. I'm living in Oslo, Norway.
Lovely. Jorn?
Yeah, Jørn Lier Horst is the way you say it in Norwegian, at least. I had my debut in 2004, and before that, I used to be, among other things, a homicide detective.
Amazing. And we'll come on to that later because that's like a massively interesting thing. So very cool. And shall I try it? I'm just building myself up. You can go for it.
Yeah. Gunnar Staalesen is my name, which is a typical Nordic name, I think. And I have been working in this business for many years. I had my first crime novel out in 1975. So in a way, I feel I'm the grandfather of all my Norwegian.
You are. You definitely are. I was 2 years old when you did that.
And I had my first book translated in 1986.
Wow. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on and having a chat with us. It's a real honor, so thank you. Let's start with Bitter Flowers. Please, could you tell us a little bit about it? Because it was written a while ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, this is one of the books in the long series of my private detective, Varg Veum. And the first book in that series was published in 1977. And Bitter Flower was published in Norway in 1991. So it's almost 30 years, or it is 30 years old. But I still feel it's a very actual novel because it's about ecology. It got poisoned garbage and also a missing girl. It is most of my novels. I'm writing in a tradition of Ross McDonald, I would say, and Raymond Chandler, and I have plots that can be quite built up with several stories growing into ones. In this book, it's at least 2 or 3 stories going back 8 years for one of them, and the other is very, very up to date at that moment when I wrote it, because it is about a demonstration against an occupation or an area where there has been produced material that is very poisonous. And I must say, I got the idea of this book originally because there was a short notice in the newspaper in Bergen that the police had stopped a car, a lorry, in a traffic control. And the notice was that if that lorry had been in a traffic accident, then almost half the population of Bergen could have been killed because it was filled up with garbage or with a lot of cyanide in it. So, and that was really an idea for a crime writer to find in the newspaper. So that was what started me writing this book. But I've written 20 novels about Varg Veum, and this book is, I think, number 10 or 11. It's almost in the middle of the series.
That's perfect. Do you get a lot of your story ideas coming straight out of a small snippet of inspiration like that? Because I had a similar thing when we were building for the London 2012 Olympics. And the site that they had to clear used to be pottery and ceramics works, and a lot of the site was rich in cyanide. And it had to be cleared and washed and cleared and washed, and in amongst that they found all sorts of bodies and other things. But there were so many little bits in there that you're like, ooh, that's brilliant. Nature's given it to us right now. Do you find yourself looking at snippets of articles or a news story and thinking, right, I'll keep that for later?
And I'm an avid newspaper reader, so most of my novels is based on ideas taken from the news. And one is the lorry with a cyanide on it. The other one is one of the classic stories. There are some mysteries in Norwegian real crime history that Jørn knows very well too, about two little girls who has disappeared and has never been found, neither alive or dead. And I think several crime writers get the idea that we will solve these mysteries, at least in a fictional way. And so this is the other background idea for Bitter Flowers.
Cool. Wow.
That's amazing. And which leads us on, you've mentioned, Jorn, that you were an investigator, and Thomas, you were a journalist, is that right?
Yeah, correct.
And your
I was a journalist for about 10 years, give or take, before I realized that I wanted to tell my own stories instead of everyone else's. So yeah.
Yeah. So Ram and Blix are sort of you fictionalized.
Well, yeah, that was the idea when we first started thinking about doing something together, that we would draw upon the experience that we had, both as a journalist and as a police investigator, like Jørn was. So naturally, our two main characters, one is a policeman and one is a journalist. And quite a few people have asked us, so does Jørn write the cop and do I write the journalist? That was the intention when we started, that we would do each our own characters, so to speak. But I think after chapter 1 or 2 or 3, that just went out the window, that plan, because we've been writing on each other's characters more or less since the very beginning, becoming each other's editors more or less all the time as we have produced the chapters for our books.
So can you talk us through the process a little bit? So how does it start and how does it go?
Well, well, I can say a few things about how the collaboration started, because that was way back in 2012. That was when we first talked about maybe doing something together. But as Jørn was writing his books and I was writing mine, it was a bit difficult for us to kind of find the right moment in our calendars to actually sit down and do the work. But we started talking and thinking about what kinds of stories we would like to write, what kinds of characters we would like to portray, and then as our ideas kind of evolved, we started doing skeleton work for what the storyline should be, for the first novel. What do we want to tell about these characters? And I think it was 2017 when we sat down to write the actual book, the first book. First, it was actually intended to be a TV series. That was what we wanted. I mean, we knew how to write books, but we wanted to create something for television. But as you probably know, everything takes forever in the TV business. So after spending quite a bit of time waiting for feedback, from producers and people high up in the hierarchy in the TV networks here in Norway, we just decided to, why don't we just write the book and we can make the movie afterwards, or the TV series afterwards. So that's what we did in 2017. We started to write, and it's kind of like I said a little bit. I touched briefly upon it. We are each other's editors. I write a chapter or two, then I send it over to Jørn. He could have some comments. Maybe he would add a few things. Maybe he would remove a few things. And it's the same thing when Jørn writes a chapter or two. He sends it to me. read it, I give feedback to it, and of course we talk about the plot all the time. How do we develop the plot? How do we keep on developing the characters? So it's quite a dynamic process. We thought to begin with that it was really going to be like we would write every other chapter, kind of, and that we would stick to our own characters, me writing about the journalists, Björn writing about the police officer, but it's really become all a very dynamic, creative writing process.
I used to say that in two writers writing one novel, it's not like this. Half the work is, maybe it's twice. It's
Maybe it's the opposite.
trying to explain how this collaboration work is very hard, but it's a tag team effort.
Yeah, definitely.
It's interesting to hear, isn't it, Chris? Because we've spoken as well to Neil Richards and Matt Costello about their process, and they're exactly, they're saying one American, one British, writing an American and British character, assuming that each would take their own. And you've got to unify the voice across the whole book. And if you ask them now, and I'm sure you guys are the same, if you asked you now who wrote which line, which word, you wouldn't be able to say categorically, I did the good one.
Categorically, definitely not, because it's all it's all mixed, it's all intertwined.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Have there been any major disagreements, or are you fairly on the same page? Best not say it.
We are still
awkward silence follows. No.
Yeah. No, we are still friends, but kind of for being two writers working on the same project, you have to have some kind of the same tone of the words, the same language somehow. So even though when Thomas and I are writing on our other projects, they are completely different in tone and style, but here we are, fits quite good together.
Yeah, and I think, of course, there are disagreements, not in the sense that we're yelling at each other, but creative differences. We talk, we discuss, we try to. I mean, if Björn writes a chapter that this is not how I thought that the scene would be, then of course we talk about it, and what I think we are very good at is to make suggestions. If there is something that we don't really feel is right for the story, we always have suggestions on how it could be done differently. So it's not, neither of us would pick up the phone or write an email to the other one saying that I did not like this. It's all very respectful, very collaborative, I would say, because that is what it is. It's collaboration between two authors who, of course, we have our ideas that we put into it. I mean, an idea for a chapter, when we start to actually write the chapter, things can turn out slightly differently. So it's an ongoing discussions about tiny details. About, because any novel, and I think a crime novel would be that there would be more details in a crime novel that you will need to agree upon. That would have to be correct and good and cool and fun and twisty, and we have to agree on all of that. So we talk a lot. I don't know how many thousand emails we have going back and forth for each book we write, but it's quite massive, the communication.
Brilliant.
And at this point, I guess, can you tell us a bit about Unhinged, which is the third in the series? Is that right?
Yeah, go ahead, Jan.
Thank you. Yeah, Unhinged is the third installment, and the story starts inside the interrogation room. Blisk is sitting on the opposite side of the table from where he's used to as a suspect, and in the next room, a madame is sitting, and Blix has just shot and killed a man, and madame saw it all happen. That is the start, yes. And some days earlier, another investigator, Sofia Kovic, has uncovered a connection between several murders in Oslo, in the city. And she tries to call Blix, but before he reached the phone, she is brutally shot and killed in her own apartment. And that somehow kicks off the whole story.
Yeah. So the novel is partly told through the interrogation room, where Blix basically has to give his accounts and explain himself about what happened. So it's a bit back and forth between what happened and how things evolve after he has been put into that interrogation room.
Yes,
yeah, go ahead.
And that way of telling the story is part of the big project, to tell a story somehow in a different manner from each book. This is kind of unusual way of telling a story like this, I think.
Yeah, and another thing that we were conscious about when we started writing this series is that it's very easy to, when you start a series, that you kind of feel like you have to stick to the format of that first novel. You have to kind of give the reader what they expect. That is not what we wanted to do with the series. We wanted the reader to not necessarily know what they're getting. You know, with each installment, they are quite different, all three of them, the three which we have done so far. And I think, Jørn, as well, we can safely say that the fourth one as well is going to be quite different from
Absolutely.
from the first three. We are about 1/3 into writing that right now as we speak. So yeah, we are, and in that way, I think we are challenging ourselves in a way, challenging ourselves as well, which makes this project very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a really interesting point. So I'm really sorry,
Gunnar.
Yeah.
Gunnar. He's not Gunnar. He doesn't
Very
support
good.
Arsenal.
Very good.
Gunnar.
Very good.
When I need him, I'll just point at you, Sean. And
Gunnar.
What Thomas was saying there about making or keeping things interesting or trying out things. I mean, so you've been writing since the 70s. How do you keep yourself fresh and enjoying it? I mean, I'm assuming you still enjoy it.
Yes, you know, I have two careers as a writer, because I'm a playwright too. I write for the theater, and I have had 10, 12 big productions at the theater in Bergen. And at least the last 15, almost 20 years, I go from a theatrical production to a crime novel. So I have a rest in between the novels. And when I listen to Jørn and Thomas talking about how they are working together, that's just like being in a theater, because in a theater, you go into a company and the writer is only one of the person who creates the final result. And I have written 2 or 3 musicals. And when you write on a musical, I'm the playwright. I have a writer writing the song text, and I have the composer, of course, and we have the director in the end, and we always discuss with the director. But that's a similar way of working. And then when I have left that and I go into my office and start to write a new Varg Veum novel, I'm so happy to be alone with myself, having no other people to discuss with but Varg Veum. And of course, I created Varg Veum in the 70s. And here's a character who grows older. So he was 34 in the first novel. In the novel I'm writing now, he is 62. So he has grown older, and that makes him new in almost every book I start to write. And the one that were published in UK last year, called Fallen Angels, that is one of the central novels in the series that tells about Varg Veum's childhood, his young days, and it ends in a very dark mood. Varg is sitting and drinking for 3 months after he has solved the mystery. And then I said to myself, I can't go on writing with this man. He is so depressed. He is so deep in the cellar. I have to get him up in the daylight. So I did as people do in real life. I sent him to a detox institution. So when Bitter Flowers starts, Varg is just coming out from detoxation. He will not taste aquavit, the Norwegian liquor, in this book at all, because he is not allowed to it. And he is in a good shape, but already in the first chapter, he finds a dead person in a swimming pool. And that is because he has been led there by a woman who was a physiotherapist at this detox institution. And he has got some sort of, perhaps, a relationship to her. But in the first chapter, he follows her into this house that she is looking after. They find a dead man in the pool. And when Varg cries for the girl, she's gone too. And that is, I can tell you all this because this is chapter 1. That is the beginning. That is the beginning of the story. And my way of working is that I write a synopsis. So but that's handwritten. It's 2 or 3 sheets, and I have the central characters. I have the most important things that's going to happen during the book. But when I start write, as all you writers know, then you start to be creative, and you get new ideas. Things happens that you didn't plan should happen, and even some of the central elements of the plot can be different than from the original idea. And usually it takes me 8, 9, 10 months to write a novel or perhaps till I deliver it, but let's say 5 and 6 months when I write the story first time. And that is the pleasure. That is real pleasure to write the story the first time. After that, the hard work starts, because then you have to rewrite, and you have to correct, and you have to be your own literary critic and see what is good and what is not. And of course, I have my editor at my publishing house who does his work or her work too. So this is, but still, when I've been a writer now for more than 50 years, it is because it's one of the biggest pleasure I have in my life is to sit down and write a new story. And very often it is about Varg, the private detective, who is inspired very clearly from the American big writers like Raymond Chandler, Ross McDonald. So Varg, but he is a typical Norwegian. He do not run around with a gun, but he has a sharp tongue that he has inherited from Philip Marlowe, I think, and I try to use my detective like Ross McDonald did to create a picture of Norway in this period and the problems that Norway has been confronted with. And very often it is actual themes, like in this book, pollution, and I have also written about wind turbines and oil, the problem with the oil business, racism. I try to be a writer in the style of Sjöwall Wahlöö, which was the first Swedish writers who really created this some sort of Nordic noir, which is called, and who were critical writers looking upon the society they were living in with a critical view.
I do think it's important. Sorry, carry on, Thomas.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, Gunnar, how many drafts do you do of your book before it's finished? How many rewrites do you do?
I only do one rewriting, but when I've written the first draft, and I do some very critical reading of that with a red pen in my hand, and after that I take a copy of it and put it by the side of my PC, and then I start writing through it very slowly, all once more and correcting and doing added text or taking away scenes. And usually that's enough. So after the second time, of course, I do some, still there are corrections to do and still some work to do with my editor, but mostly it is finished in that way. A book can be finished because you know you could just rewrite it and rewrite it and rewrite it, but then you would only have written one book, and I have written somewhere between 40 and 50 books all in all.
And for you guys, it must be similar to our colleagues Neil and Matt, who write together, that because you edit the previous chapter that's arrived with you before writing on, by the time you present a draft to your publisher, to your editors, it must have already been edited and refined, you know, 3-4 times, and in terms of each chapter going through a process and go, we need to go back and change this. And how many do you do before you give it to the editor?
I think it's normally when Jørn writes books, he does a draft and then he sends it to his publisher and then it's more or less finished. For me, it's the complete opposite. I'm doing, I don't know how many rewrites before a book is finished, and I think that I've contaminated Jørn a little bit with our project, because we always tend to deliver a first draft and then we have to go back and we have to change quite a few things. But hopefully now with the fourth one that we're doing, we have planned this fourth book to a much greater detail than we have done with the first three. So it's hopefully that will mean that the plot is more well thought through, before we start the actual writing. We had I would say quite a detailed skeleton for the first book before we started to write that one, but then quite a few things happened as went along writing it. For the second one, it was more that we had an idea, we knew kind of where we were going, or at least where we wanted to go, but lots happened as we were going along with it.
Yeah, we were being creative.
Yeah. Yeah, and that is always a choice to make, I suppose, and it's I mean, any author is different on that respect. Some people really like to plan everything right down to the very last detail, while we have others who just have a starting point. They may know where they want to end the story, but then they just start to write.
But and how much? Because I guess the journalist curse is to always find the perfect word, and I guess also the homicide detective's curse is to always get every detail absolutely pedantically right. And how much do you both have to go? Just write the thing, make it entertaining, leave the detail alone.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, for me, this project has been some kind of relieving, because I'm now for writing realistic police procedurals from my background as a detective. And in Norway, we don't really have any serial killers. So then I'm not writing about serial killers. But in this project, I can feel more free. Things are happening that, and the police, the detective Alexander Blix, is doing things that wouldn't have happened for real at all. So this is a really fun project for me. And then there is things are going quite a bit faster. There's more action in this. These books, Thomas, they are more thrillers than mystery books, I think.
Yeah, but at the same time, you have the whodunit element to every story that we write. If I could just add a few things to what Jørn was saying, from my background as a journalist, I was I was working as an online journalist, where you really don't have the time to look for the right word. It's all about getting the news out there as quickly as humanly possible. So I'm kind of more, I think, the impatient writer. I would like for us to move along as quickly as possible, I think. So I can write a first draft or of a chapter or even a whole book quite fast, I would think, and then spend most of my time rewriting, editing. I've said a few times, I think, that for me, I mean, previously, before this project, for me, it was more like I never quite knew what the story was until I had finished the first draft. Then I knew the framework, and then I would go back into it and edit and refine the characters, and then everything. So I've kind of struggled quite a bit trying to find the best method of writing for me. Finding the shortest route to a finished project. And after having done this now, how many novels have I written? 13? Yeah, 13 or 14. I'm starting to slowly, I think, to find a better method of how to do this. But
I love that no matter who we talk to on this podcast, and however many novels are written underneath, the process of writing a novel changes as your life changes, as your circumstances change. The experience is great, it sits underneath you, but you speak to somebody else and go, that's a great way of doing this, is a nice thought, I'll put a bit of that in, I'll take a little, that's a good tip. And I think the understanding that I think a lot of our listeners have sort of understood that now, but there was a time where you can think, well, the great novelist, and they must know exactly what they're doing, and they must be confident on every release day that this is going to be as successful as the last. And actually, I think we all sit there going, whew, here we go again. Whether it's a relief from what you're doing the rest of the time, or whether it's you're still starting blank, and is it going to work? Is this the idea? Are you going to find out halfway through that the idea is not really an idea, doesn't have the legs you thought it did? I just love the fact that Jorn, you said in Norway we don't really have serial killers, and I'm like, I'm gonna bring one in Norway. This is my new book.
I would like to say that in such a small country as Norway, it's very difficult to live from being a writer. So all of us, we had other jobs when we started being writer. I was working at the theater as a press secretary. Jörn was a police officer. Thomas was a journalist. And then we wrote in our free time. We wrote in the evenings, in the weekends, and in the vacations. I was 40 years before I could live from writing, but I could perhaps a couple of years before. But I had to write at least 7, 8 crime novels before I was ready to stop working ordinary working days and being a full-time writer. And of course, that is the big change in my life, because then I could go have a breakfast, I could go for a short walk, and I could get into my office and start writing at 10 o'clock in the morning, and do work more or less. Of course, every writer have different way of working, but to me, I work more or less 7-6 hours every day, and after that I have a free time. I read, I go for a run, I go for a cinema or in a theater or a concert, whatever, and live an ordinary life. But then next day between 10 o'clock and 4 o'clock p.m. I'm a writer again. So and to me,
nice to have the time to kill people when everything else.
I think that for almost all of the authors that I've spoken to over the years that I've been doing this, it's very interesting to listen to authors speak about their love for the craft, their love for the job itself, for me, I mean, it's always the next book which is the most interesting, not necessarily the ones that I've done.
And people always ask you questions about the one you've done. You're like, I finished it. It's done.
Yeah.
Do you?
And it's weird as well when you have we all have quite a few foreign publications, and sometimes, I mean, like you are now, Gunnar, you're talking about a book that you wrote 30 years ago, which is just insane if you think about it. I mean, and sometimes when we are out in the world traveling, talking about our books, well, I can only speak for myself, but there have been moments right before I've gone on stage where I've had to really think, what on earth was that book about? You know, which book is
but
this?
also, especially if you write books in a number of series, as both Chris and I do, that you're like, oh, we're talking about that character. Okay.
Yeah.
Was that in this series?
Yeah.
Because I can't tell you. But I love it. I mean, you know, Chris teaches primary school full time, so he kills people in the evenings when his children. He has 2 small children when they sleep. I run a publishing company full time, so I kill people on the weekends. But you know, these are the things you do, and as you say, there's a tipping point at which you say, right, I can sustain this through just my writing, and then there you go. But in the meantime, I think it's a thing driven by passion. I don't know that there's another. You can't really call it a hobby because there's not another career that you would pursue so relentlessly, given that it pays you not enough to live for so long, and potentially never. You know, I mean, there are lots of very, very good authors who never get paid enough to stop doing what they have to do.
Definitely.
But it starts with being a reader, I think. I think all writers are readers. We have read since we were 7, 8 years old, and we still read. I read some books every day, because I enjoy reading, and that's because I enjoy reading. Then I start at one point. I started to write books that I would have liked to read if they were written by other writers. And I think that is almost all writers agree about that is the way we think. And very often when I'm writing a scene in a book that is going to have a lot of suspense in it, and suddenly I sit here with my neck up, and I'm really afraid myself for what can happen. And you can get some surprises, even if you have planned the surprises. If you get the feeling of this is suspense, then you can be quite sure that the reader will have the same feeling when they read the book later.
You love that, absolutely love that feeling when a character that you've created surprises you by turning out to be something different, and then you look back at what you've written and they've been different the whole time. It's just that you hadn't noticed it yet. Do you, writing as a duo, do you ever surprise each other with something you've done and you think, oh, that's really good?
No, all the time. I was doing a chapter earlier today when I thought that, well, this is not precisely how I thought that this character was going to be talking about another character. You know, that the relationship between the two of them, that was not precisely how I thought it was going to be when I started writing the scene. But then it turned out to be quite different, but more interesting.
John's looking really nervous now.
Yeah, are you talking about our next script?
Yeah. Chapter
Okay.
35, yeah.
35. Oh.
Well, this is where the whole thing could unravel.
Sorry, everyone. Please, can I ask about your experience with translators? Do you have any? I mean, are you involved in that, or is it literally here's the book, go and crack on?
I'm very happy with my English translator now, Don Bartlett, who really is a creative translator. When I tell a joke in Norwegian, it can be difficult to translate because humor is different from country to country, and it can be a joke in the language that is not witty at all in English. And then Don, he makes a new joke, which is in the same attitude as in the original. But I think it's very important for us in either in UK, in France, and in Denmark. I have a very tight relationship to my translators, so that if they have some questions, I get a mail from them and I can answer them, and we have a discussion. But mostly they do it by themselves, and I'm really surprised of how much of even the Norwegian, the story in the Norwegian language comes through in the translation. Even if I knew there was some UK critic who said, well, he had read the last book by Don Bartlett, or was it by Gunnar Staalesen? Because of course the language is Don's when he translated English, but the story and most of it is by Gunnar Staalesen.
I think you just have to trust the publisher first and foremost, because obviously we cannot speak Korean necessarily, or Finnish for that matter. It's quite a big difference between publishers and territories as well. Some territories you never hear anything from the translator at all. You just get a book in the mail, which is quite intimidating, because as Gunnar mentioned, there are so many nuances in a language which doesn't necessarily translate, easily. I'm always happy when the translator sends me emails with lots of questions. I mean, the more the merrier, almost, just so that we know that all the details are precisely the way that I wanted them to be. But yeah, quite often that happens when you just get a book in the mail, and you basically have to trust that the publisher has done a good job with it.
I do think that's really interesting, in that, I mean, like I had a lot of contact with the German translator for the first 3 of my books, and she was brilliant, and she genuinely made them into books that I thought were far better. But that's just because she was so clever with the German language, and English is a bit base and bare by comparison. And then they were like, right, and there's the Polish version, and you're like, go what now? No, there's differences. I can speak German, so I could work with the German translator, and we could play with those. And obviously, I can't speak Polish, but I didn't even know they were doing it. And Chinese Mandarin, sorry, but and then you just have no contact with some, and then you have massive contact with others. And
But even though if you have contact with a translator or not, then you might get some reviews from the countries, and in the end of the reviews, it usually says, and it's perfectly translated by Megan Turney, for our sake. And I think, how do they know that? Because
exactly.
but I figured this out. They know it. I can see it myself when I'm reading a translated novel, and I'm not thinking that it is translated. It is like it's floating in my own language. Then I can think it's very well translated.
Yeah, I think that does make a difference, doesn't it? When you kind of go, oh, and that's what I felt when I read the German version of my first book. I was like, that's a really good way of putting it. It's not how I wrote it, but that's exactly what I mean. And somebody that can take the sense of what you've put on the page but rewrite it is effectively making it work for that audience, and it's perfect.
An interesting thing with the translators is that for a so small language as Norwegian, most of our publishers, they can't read our books in the original language, so they have to trust the translator. Very often the translators are the people who recommend a book being translated, because they have read it in the original language. And that is different, of course, from being an English writer, because everybody can read English and can see if it's an interesting book or is it a good book, but there are not a publisher in the UK who can read all the Norwegian books and see, is this a good one, is this a good one? So they have to trust the people in the middle, and very often that is the translators.
Can you imagine if there was a falling out of epic proportions between 2 Norwegians, one of whom could speak perfect English, and was a translator, and they basically stole every idea from the from the Norwegian author.
Oh,
Well, I'll
that's a
never
plot
know.
for a book,
And then
yeah.
made
Yeah.
your book in English absolute rubbish.
Mhm.
Someone's next idea. Just
A lot-
We have
a lot of
we have
people-
motive for
A lot of people ask me in Norway when they hear that my book are translated into English, do you do it yourself? They ask me.
No. No, not at all. Thanks very much.
But Thomas, you read the English translations of our work, don't you?
Yeah, yeah.
I just usually have some chapters or some paragraphs that I know is well written in Norwegian, and I look it up and check the translations only of those few words that I think at then I was clever. Hope it's transferred to English. But you read the whole thing, don't you?
Well, I haven't done that with the last two, I think, but I have, how many books do I have in English? 8 or 9, something like that, I think. And most of them I've read cover to cover, and the reason for that is basically that for a lot of translations they are based on the English version.
Yeah.
So for me it's been imperative to kind of know what the basis is, you know, in English. So it's basically to put my mind at ease a little bit with the translations out there. Lately, the last, like I said, the last couple of books that we did, I trusted the translator completely, and our editor as well in around the books. I knew that he would take very good care of it, you know. And so for me, it was a time issue at the time when the proof of the book came in. I really was super pressed for time. I couldn't read it because it takes a couple of days at least, you know, when it's not your first language to really go through the whole thing.
But do you have the same translator for your personal books and these books that you write together?
No, we have right now we have Megan Turney for our she's done the last two, and we had who did we have on the
Andrews, my translator, Andrews.
Yes, and I've had Carrie Dixon as well as a translator. I've had another one, Charlotte Barslund, I think her name is, a Danish translator, actually, a brilliant one. So I've had the experience of quite a few, and they've all been really good.
As Gunnar was mentioning, the importance of the UK translation it reminds me of when I met my Japanese translator, and he had to have an interpreter because he couldn't speak or read Norwegian. He had he had translated the Japanese version by some of the English and some of the German translation, and he could also point out differences between the UK translation and the German translation. So quite interesting, actually.
So deciphering Chinese whispers, literally, you know, I've whispered it here, and you know, Chinese whispers. I suddenly thought that's probably the English word for the game, where you whisper a word and it goes around a circle and comes back to you. And, Anyway, translations, fun times.
Yeah, that's a perfect example. If Rob Parker were here, he would be asking, "What are you writing next, and can we know a little bit about it?"
Yeah,
Thomas.
You go first, Gunnar.
I have written the first 30 pages of my Vagveum novel number 20. And if I'm lucky, it will be published this year, but I'm busy with the theater production too, so perhaps it will be in 23. I'm not sure yet. But I have the idea, I have the beginning. I'm not quite sure who will be the culprit this time, but I have some ideas about it.
Brilliant.
Thomas has revealed that we are in chapter 35.
Chapter 35, indeed.
A surprising twist of chapter 35.
Very surprising. Jonas going to have a heart attack tomorrow. No, I'm just kidding. No, we are currently writing the 4th installment in our series, where there is this German serial killer who has escaped from prison in Germany, and there are things that indicate that he, for some reason, is on his way to Norway.
That was my whole idea.
Yeah, you're too late, Sean. Sorry. So and at the starting point of the book, Alexander Blix, he's in jail actually, because of what happened in the 3rd book. He's currently awaiting his appeal. He has appealed for he was convicted for killing that person that you mentioned earlier.
Hello.
Yeah. And when the police search the cell of that serial killer escaping from prison, they find a note that was attempted to be flushed down into the toilet. They managed to retrieve it, but on that note there was a name of a Norwegian person who is sitting in the same prison as our main character. So what is the link between the guy escaping and the guy in the prison? That would be the case for our main protagonist to try to figure out. Obviously, he's a cop, so being inside a jail is not easy. It's in fact very dangerous for him to be there. And that guy that he has to try to get closer to, he is his primary enemy inside the prison. So that is
Did you have that arc planned when he did what he did at the end of 3? Or
No.
Bravo.
Absolutely not. No.
Good.
We because when we finished the 3rd one, we decided to take a little break. We didn't know if there was going to be a book 4, but taking a year off from the universe, we I think we both felt that there are more stories here with these main characters.
I think that's one of the joys of writing, is you write yourself into a corner with a character where you go, there's no coming back.
Yeah.
Hang on.
Yeah.
There's coming back. He's coming.
Yeah.
Here he comes.
Yeah. So we've not only decided to do a 4th one, we're going to do a 5th one. So
Amazing. Great to hear.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, I think that's probably all the time we have. It has been amazing hearing about how the stories have come together and about the characters and stuff. So thank you so much. Both books are out on ebook at the minute, aren't they, in the UK?
Yes.
Unhinged is coming out on the 17th of February in paperback, and Bitter Flower is coming out on the 22nd of January. So soon.
Very soon. Yeah.
So yes, listeners, go pick them up. You know what you're going to get. It's going to be good. Thank you so much to the 3 of you. It's been great.
Oh, we've still got so many more questions. We haven't got any more time. I wanted to talk about the culture, the landscape, the darkness.
Well,
Well,
We'll
yeah.
have to come back another time then.
Absolutely.
Maybe
We can do this every week.
Yeah, why not? We just go Nordic special every week.
Yeah.
Yeah, why not?
Maybe we'll book some flights, Sean.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Thank you all so much for joining us and for sharing your experiences and your journeys and all of the ways you get to do things.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Again soon.
We'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.